I'd like to remember Virginia as somebody who was brave, was courageous, was deeply troubled. Without her, none of what took place would have been possible.
You were a close friend of hers, and Virginia Giuffre's family said in a statement that the toll of abuse became unbearable. Was that your own impression in Virginia's last few months?
It was my impression. It has been also my own experience. And I think there's an opportunity here after her death, and perhaps even because of her death, for us to get a greater understanding of the trajectory of recovery from abuses of this type, and to learn a little bit more about how non-linear that recovery is, and how triggers come, recovery ebbs and flows. And of course, Virginia was being bullied online, and she was, in the midst of trying to navigate through recovering whilst simultaneously continuing to be attacked.
Bullied by who? And people saying what?
If you look at her social media, you will see hundreds, even thousands of comments from people saying that she was not telling the truth, that they were glad that she had passed.
And what do you think of those people?
Pretty tragic. Well, with the work that I do, having worked in mental health, recovery from trauma, and substance use disorder for 15 years, I have compassion for people who are coming from a place of ignorance, coming from a place where they just don't understand. That being said, there are consequences to people behaving in such a way, and one of the consequences is certainly that this contributed to the pressure that was put on somebody, and also the fact that it stops people coming forward. It stops victims and survivors coming forward, because what is the incentive to come forward if this is the way that we handle things and this is the response?
You testified yourself in court in 2019 against Jeffrey Epstein, and you were one of more than 20 women to speak out and accuse Epstein of sexually abusing you. Obviously, he was dead by then. He'd taken his own life. On the day of the hearing, though, you said these words: "I am every girl he did this to, and they are all me. And today we stand together, those that are present and those that are not." How important was that day to you?
You know, I didn't know how important that day would be to me until that day came. And not only on a personal level, but on a collective level. And on the level where this was a legally unprecedented moment in American legal history, where Judge Berman gave alleged victims the opportunity to come and stand together and speak in front of Epstein's attorneys, in front of the press, in front of his court, and share their experience and share their feelings if they'd like to do so. So I stood shoulder to shoulder with about 23 of the alleged victims. And it was an incredibly powerful moment. It was also an incredibly difficult moment, and we all took turns holding each other up and also breaking down.
You have described Epstein as both captivating and frightening. With the passage of time, how do you describe him now?
I think since his death, I've done a lot of work in recovering and still on the road to recovery. It's an ongoing path. And so I still remember him that way, and I remember him and how I felt at the time, during, and for many years after. And I remembered him as captivating, terrifying. I also just see the tragedy that so many people fell victim to this so unnecessarily. And so many people asked for help, went to the police, went to the FBI, and were turned away. And there is a failing on the side of our, the system that's in place, the systems that are meant to be in place to protect children and victims of this type of abuse.
When Epstein was alive, you said that you felt in danger. I wonder.
That's right.
Do you still feel that now or not?
So I think there's a difference between being in danger and feeling in danger, but the experience is not different to the person who's feeling it, if you know what I mean. So I think at the time when Epstein was alive, there was a real and present threat in coming forward. And that kind of fear lives in your body, and it doesn't go away because that threat is no longer necessarily reality. So there are moments when, when you study how your body and your brain remembers things, where my body will be triggered to remember a feeling or remember a fear, and it is as though it's real. So it still very much affects me. But the fear isn't as real and as present as it was.
I understand. Your background is relatively privileged compared to some of Epstein's victims. And you said, for me, I was involved in that kind of lifestyle growing up, and so I thought I could cope, and I thought I could handle it. Can you explain that for us?
For anyone who either has been 16 years old, 17 years old, 18 years old, for anyone who has children of that age, you kind of think that you can handle things. And because I had grown up with a privileged environment, having socialized in the same kind of scene that both Maxwell and Epstein were in, I felt that there was a level of comfort in that area, and that I could hold my own and cope with the things. And of course, every teenager wants to feel sophisticated. They want to surround themselves with people who are older than them, people who are successful.
I mean, you talked about your teenage years and growing up. You would have seen other young women in Epstein's presence. Did you ever speak to each other? Did you ever share what was going on?
So I think one of the tools that perpetrators will use to prevent being stopped in their tracks, to prevent being discovered, is the sort of divide and rule technique. And so even if we wanted to, even if there had been an opportunity to, it's very unlikely that somebody in that position who has been groomed is going to communicate and collaborate with a fellow survivor or victim, because the fear is so real and present. And, in a situation with somebody like Epstein and Maxwell, there was no way of knowing when you were being recorded, what was being listened to, what would be repeated, who was on your side, who might be somebody who would say something. You didn't know who your friends were.
Anouska, we're going to bring in your friend, who is a physician, Gabel Mate, who talks about trauma and addiction. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for talking to us. I wonder how you think trauma can affect survivors in the long term.
The effects of trauma are multifold, and they involve every aspect of human existence. On the mental health level, people with trauma are at far higher risk for addictions, as Anouska's experience illuminates, for depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, all manner of mental health diagnoses, and they have great difficulty in relationships, in forming and maintaining healthy relationships, and above all, they have an unhealthy relationship with themselves. They have a shame-based view of themselves, somehow as if there was something flawed about them. that they don't deserve a better life. So trauma has got multiple ramifications. Trauma can also make you an aggressor and a perpetrator, actually. We don't talk about that side of it too much, but that's also the case.
So what kind of support is needed for people like Anouska, for people like Virginia Giuffre?
Well, first of all, they need to be made to feel safe enough so they can open up and speak. That's the saving grace. Now, most trauma victims have nobody to talk to. They're all alone with it. So the first thing is you have to have a safe environment where you're heard and you listened to and you're believed. And most people who are traumatized never had that in their childhoods. Therefore, they don't even know how to look for it as adults.
Anouska, you know there has been pressure on the White House to release more information from the declassified Epstein files. The White House press secretary said last month there was no specific timeline to release the rest. Do you want to see those released or not?
I'm wondering why there's so much pressure to have them released. I'm wondering what everybody thinks is in there. You know, there are a lot of conspiracy theories flying around, and as a survivor myself, and having spoken with some other survivors, I don't feel that it would be helpful for these files to be released to the public. There was some information that was released, and it was promised that the names of the victims or survivors would not be re-released or released for the first time, and yet once again my name was published. And I think people have to start examining what it is that they're hoping for in having this knowledge, in the public having this knowledge. If there is to be any other kind of investigation or charging of another party, they absolutely should not release this information to the public, because it would compromise the criminal investigation that might take place.
I want to thank you both very much for giving us your time here on Newsnight. We really appreciate it. Thank you.